Welcome to the Heart of Innovation. 60 minutes that could save life and limb with new breakthrough ideas and innovation changing the healthcare landscape. Brought to you by patient advocacy group thewaytomyheart.org in partnership with Cardiovascular System Incorporated's patient advocacy campaign, Take a Stand Against Amputation. Here are your hosts for the Heart of Innovation, Emmy Award-winning journalist and founder of The Way to My Heart, Kym McNicholas, and interventional cardiologist and founder of the Save My Piggies Health Education Series, Dr. John Phillips.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. We're taking today's show in just a little bit of a different direction. It's the Heart of Innovation. Normally, we talk about vascular diseases, but we're going to do a little bit of a spin on it because still vascular disease is represented. It's actually the executive director of the Society of Vascular Surgery that we're actually going to be interviewing about a different foundation that he and his wife created to help save their son who has a rare genetic disorder. And we're going to get into that in just a moment. Oh, it's such a great story, very inspiring, leaving you with a cliffhanger and welcoming my co-host, Dr. John Phillips, who is going to be sharing some inspiration with us before we get into today's topic. Hi, John.
Hello, Kimberly. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. A little rainy out here in sunny California. In fact, there are floods and there's lots of snow. So different than the drought that we've had the past few years. I almost walked outside and said, what is that wet stuff?
Well, interestingly, it's misting here in Columbus, but it's about 38 degrees. So that makes it just really uncomfortable, honestly, when it's kind of cold, but not cold enough to snow. And there's a lot of moisture in the air. It's just one of those days where you just kind of want to stay inside. So I'm glad to be here with you. And I'm really excited to have this interview. It sounds like the topic is going to, I think, inspire a lot of people. So I'm hopeful that we can kind of squeeze all the juice out of this orange in the 40 plus minutes that we have.
I think we'll need a few hours for this one because you're just going to be sitting there with your jaw just dropped. It's so inspiring. And speaking of inspiring, do you have a moment of inspiration to kick things off?
Dr. John Phillips, spectacular vascular moment of inspiration.
Well, it fires me up every single time. I love that.
It does. And you know what? We always have to thank Mike, producer Mike, for pulling that together for us. So this show today, I think, is kind of interesting because this past week I came across a book that I had downloaded a few years ago, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I think everybody should read it or listen to it. And I think it dovetails nicely into the story that the Shaws are going to tell us about their son and the foundation that they started for his medical illness. And so the nuts and bolts of the book is Frankl was a prisoner in the Nazi concentration camps in World War II. He's also a psychiatrist, and through his experience, he survived the concentration camp, and through his experience, he founded a kind of new psychotherapeutic method, trying to find meaning in life when there is potentially no meaning left at all. And he's got a lot of quotes in here, but I think this quote is germane to the conversation that we're going to have. And so he's quoted as saying, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And this whole notion of having an attitude and the ability to have that attitude as your final freedom in choice, when you may feel like you have no other choices. And we talk about this a lot with our patients who suffer from Ph.D. and other medical issues, that they feel there's all this suffering, but there is meaning in the suffering, and it's having a positive attitude and making those positive choices. So with that, I've digressed a little bit, but again, great book to read, quick read, and I recommend it to anyone who's kind of looking for that stoic mentality.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly powerful. It's about creating the change that you want to see in order to create that meaning that you want to feel and you want to have, right? And I think that's... Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, because like everything every action we choose, so it's a choice. I think all your actions are choices, and your attitude in any given circumstance or situation that's freedom there, and that can dictate whether it's a positive or negative experience.
Yeah, no, I agree that it can be a choice, and it starts with a choice in how you want to feel about something, right? It's so disempowering to think that you don't have choices, to feel as though you're the victim of something. That's not empowering at all. What is empowering is to say, what can I control? What can I create? What can I do? What choices can I make? And I think that that's what Kym Slaw and his wife Anne Slaw both felt like. I mean, to think that your son has this rare genetic disorder and most kids don't live very long, and why would you want to settle for that? You have this beautiful child and you want to see them grow into adulthood, and instead of sitting back and settling for that feeling of being a victim and what can't be done, how do you get into that state of mind and figure out, no, wait, what can be done? What can we create to get it done, to help our son thrive? And with that, I want to welcome them to the show. Hi, Ken. Hi, Anne.
Hello. Hi, Kym.
And I'm sure that you both, that quote that John shared with us probably hits home for you both.
Definitely hits home. And I really want to emphasize that while we're going to talk about our story with Andrew, really the message here for your audience is really about building hope and aspiration, and really, as you mentioned, Kym, the choice that we all have to, number one, learn and know everything that there is to know about the situation we're in, so that we can understand context and what our range of options and choices are. And then secondly, once you understand a little bit more about what is known and not known, given your current situation, you can start to map your way forward, one small step at a time, toward a more positive goal. And that's the key. It's not to try to jump to the end all at once, but to take it a step at a time and let kind of momentum and knowledge build. And, I think the story that we have with Andrew, our son, is a story that thousands of parents also experience in this country, in the world. You have a beautiful child, as you said, Kym. His birth was an exciting journey in and of itself. So for the audience to fill in a couple of examples, not to get too technical, but Andrew was born with a very rare neurological condition called familial dysautonomia, where basically, because of a genetic defect, Andrew had about half of the normal neurons controlling his autonomic nervous system, which is what controls your heart rate and your breathing and all of the automatic functions that are going on in your body. So imagine that your body has only half the battery power that it normally does to control all of the things that should be on autopilot. And so it's very common for these kids to have blood pressures that go up and down and are very, very poorly controlled. And they have all kinds of other neurological issues. And when Andrew was born in 1992, Anne and I, both being scientists of sorts, of course, went to the literature to find out everything that we could about this condition. And it was pretty scary. The prognosis for Andrew, the outcome for Andrew, was that most of these kids did not survive past 6 to 10 years of age.
Wow.
the gene was not yet discovered for this condition. There were a couple of physicians and a couple of scientists that had started to study it. The most famous being at the University of Colorado, Denver. This condition, before it was called familial dysautonomia, was called Riley-Day syndrome, named after the two scientists that first took an interest in the condition. So when Anne and I, were struggling to figure out what was going on with Andrew and why he was having so much of the difficulty that he was having, we discovered the literature on Riley-Day syndrome. And that's really how our journey began in terms of understanding what his prognosis and his trajectory would be. And that brought us to the first choice point, as both Dr. Phillips and yourself have pointed out. And for Anne and I to be told by our pediatrician and to be told by experts at that point, we have to accept this situation. There's really nothing we can do to change the prognosis of Andrew's disease or Andrew's life. Was just not acceptable to us as parents. It was not acceptable to us as advocates for Andrew. And so we just dedicated ourselves then and there that we were going to do everything that we could possibly do, muster all of the resources that we could muster together to try to change that story and try to change that trajectory. And that's really what launched us on the journey. So don't know, Anne, if you want to add anything in here at this point.
Yeah. Yes, and we will get to Anne in just a moment. Right here on the Heart of Innovation, we're going to hear what sparked this diagnosis, what symptoms they discovered, and also hear what they're doing now to help kids around the world who also have this disorder. So stay with us.
Leg health can indicate risk for heart attack, stroke, and amputation. If you have leg pain or cramps while walking, get checked for peripheral artery disease or PAD. PAD is plaque buildup in mainly the leg arteries. Be sure to ask your physician for an ankle brachial index, also called an ABI test, where they use blood pressure cuffs to analyze the blood pressure in your legs. If they discover you have arterial plaque that's limiting blood flow to your feet, medicine and a regimented walking program are frontline treatment. If PAD is in its advanced stages, your physician may schedule a surgical intervention. Minimally invasive tools are available to remove plaque and restore blood flow, including Cardiovascular System's Diamondback 360 atherectomy system, which sands away plaque that is a hard calcium. It's important to discuss all options with your physician, and if told you have no options, get a second opinion. Take a stand against amputation. For more information, go to standagainsamputation.com. That's standagainsamputation.com.
Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation. For more on today's topic, go to theheartofinnovation.org. That's theheartofinnovation.org. Once again, here's Emmy Award-winning journalist Kym McNicholas and interventional cardiologist Dr. John Phillips.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We have just started our, I think, very inspiring conversation with the Slaw family, Ken and Anne. And before we went to break, Ken was just laying the foundation about the disease that their son Andrew was diagnosed with, called familial dysautonomia. And one of the things I love about doing this show, I learn something every time. Maybe I heard about this in medical school, but I don't remember it. So Anne, can you just share a little bit of your experience after Andrew was born, when you guys picked up that something wasn't right, and how you kind of navigated through the healthcare system with your pediatricians, I'm assuming pediatricians, to try to figure out what's wrong?
Absolutely. So when Andrew was born, he came to us with a couple of generic concerns. Your son appears low tone. He seems kind of floppy. His heart rate his heart rate during birth kept going up and down. So there were some concerns there. The biggest thing that came to all of our attention was failure to suck. So here we were holding this 5-pound baby, and he could not take in any liquid. We then had to learn very quickly how to do NG feeds, so that's a tube down the nose. That was a bit scary because they said if we couldn't learn, we couldn't take him home. But if we screwed up, we could end up putting the tube into his lungs. So, anxiety, of course, was going up, but we learned, and we were able to take him home from the hospital about a week and a half later. I remember.
Did you have a diagnosis at that point?
No.
What did they explain to you is the reason for it?
That's a good question. What we were told from the nurses was some babies are just born like this. They didn't seem too concerned. The doctors just took each thing and said, well, let's see how he does. There was really no diagnosis at that point. And to your point, John, yes, you probably did hear about familial dysautonomia in med school, but it was a footnote, and it was a footnote to everybody at the time. No, this was not on anybody's radar whatsoever. When we were able to bring him home, and we did the NG feedings, it was clear that as we went to the pediatrician, there were these floppiness issues, occupational therapy, physical therapy, some swallowing therapy was suggested, but again, no diagnosis. This was our first child, so we did not really know what's considered normal. And we took each of these challenges as, okay, so he has a difficulty feeding. Well, let's see if we can, as he got a little older, let's see if we can thicken his formula. That seemed to help. So every time there was a challenge, we came up with some type of solution, with the supports that were around him. As we continued to go to the pediatrician, and I kept a running list of all of our concerns, nothing seemed to come together. All of the symptoms were sort of scattered all over the place, and there didn't seem to be this overarching diagnosis. He has this issue, he has that issue. Each of those issues were being addressed individually, but there was no overarching kind of diagnosis. So what was encouraging for all of us was that this little baby, eventually a toddler, was meeting and sometimes exceeding some of his developmental milestones. He was behind in many things, but he continued to make his own curve. And what the pediatrician told us is, as long as he's making developmental improvements in his own way, we really don't need a diagnosis. And in fact, if you take him to a neurological, a neurologist, you might get some title or some diagnosis, but it's not going to help. However, when Andrew was 4, he got his fingers caught in a sliding glass door. And I remember grabbing my fingers and waiting for the big scream. Nothing came. There was no scream. And so we went back to the pediatrician and said, okay, we have these list of 14 kind of odd symptoms. He blotches when he gets eat sometimes, some things that were on this list of about 14 things, but now we had 15. Failure to feel pain. That really raised the eyebrows of a pediatrician and said, it's time to see the neurologist.
So did they think that, sorry to interrupt, but
Please.
I guess that was kind of the turning point, the lack of pain sensation?
Yes.
Okay.
I would just add that, having worked with pediatricians for so long, that is a fairly normal course, that pediatricians are very patient because
Sure.
they want to give kids a chance to catch up. Kids get behind for lots of reasons in their developmental in their development, and so they always like to give kids the benefit of the doubt of a little bit of extra time. But as Anne said, there were these symptoms like, Andrew, who is also himself a very happy baby and a very happy child, when we got him laughing, sometimes he laughed so hard he'd pass out, and we thought, okay, that's not normal, right? Like he would turn blue, pass out, and then he'd be fine, right? And so, we started to have to modify our behavior, like, do not tell this kid anything too funny, right? Because, he has a risk
There's a sign, right?
Right? And so you have this sort of constellation, which is, and our family loves to make people laugh, right? So we're a bunch of stand-up comedians in this family. So, it's, and Andrew himself is a stand-up comedian, and so, laughter has always been a big part of our life. And so, we've learned with Andrew to avoid extremes, right?
And so laughter is leading to Andrew passing out. He's not feeling pain. You're on your way to the neurospecialist, and we're going to leave you right there on the Heart of Innovation. We're going to continue with this story next. Stay with us.
3 years ago, my symptoms started with leg pain and leg cramps while walking.
Me too, with a tightness in my calves.
Well, do you know, my doctor thought that my leg cramps were a side effect of the statin he prescribed me.
Well, my doctor just brushed them off as another symptom of old age.
Mine thought the pain was radiating from my spine.
My doctor blamed my neuropathy on diabetes until I got a wound on my foot that just wouldn't heal.
Yeah, it turns out we all have peripheral artery disease, also known as PAD.
It's plaque buildup mainly in the leg arteries causing poor circulation.
For me, the diagnosis came too late and I lost my leg, but that does not have to happen to you.
No, it does not, because there are treatment options available if you're diagnosed early enough.
PAD. Peripheral artery disease. If you've been experiencing leg pain, leg cramps, or neuropathy when walking, and your doctor isn't hearing you, we are. We are the Way to My Heart, the largest support network for peripheral artery disease patients, and we want to help you get back on your feet again. Visit our website at thewaytomyheart.org or call our Leg Saver hotline 415-320-7138. Your life and limb could depend on it.
Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation. For more on today's topic, go to theheartofinnovation.org. That's theheartofinnovation.org. Once again, here's Emmy Award-winning journalist Kym McNicholas and interventional cardiologist Dr. John Phillips.
Welcome back, everybody. So, Ken and Anne, you just started to kind of tell us the journey, the medical journey, I think, as it were, about Andrew, and you had all these symptoms that just were things that you noticed that weren't right developmentally, but then I guess what kind of really got y'all concerned was the perceived lack of pain sensation. During the break, you also mentioned that when he cried, that you wouldn't see tears. So then the pediatrician thought, okay, that now there is something abnormal here. Up until that point, and were you guys holding out hope that this was just, Andrew was just a little bit slow to kind of develop, and he was going to be a normal little boy at some point? Or did you all feel, as these things were kind of unraveling, that this was something that was going to be long term and maybe not the way y'all had planned?
Kenny, what do you think?
Well, I think we definitely had a deep-seated feeling that we were in for something for the long haul here. we did not believe that Andrew was on a normal trajectory at that point. So we were just preparing ourselves, from very early on in his life to do everything that we could to provide him the support that he would need to be able to thrive, whatever was going on with him. But the first step for us was we need a diagnosis. We need to figure out exactly what this is, because as I said earlier in the show, the first step of managing your own situation is knowing where you are in space. We have no context. So we needed a diagnosis, we needed to learn about it, and we needed to know where we're starting from. And then we felt like we could map our way, forward from there.
Okay, so you go to the neurologist, and what tests were performed, and at what point, how long did they take before you actually got the diagnosis?
So the test was performed in the office, I believe at the time. It was a histamine test. Now today there's actually a genetic, blood test. But at that time there was not. And so what I remember is that they injected something into Andrew's forearm. I believe it was histamine, and also injected that into my forearm. And then we compared the wheel of around it to see if they matched, which they did not. So the neurologist felt that his top guess was that Andrew had Riley-Day, and now known as familial dysautonomia. When we got that diagnosis and it was confirmed, we started to read all the literature, and I think that's when the Kleenex came out. That was like, okay, here's this little kid, he's 4 years old, and the literature says that he is going to be gone in 6 years. So in that moment of despair, how does a parent imagine the death of their child? I mean, there really kind of are no words for that. But I think there's something very strong that you tap into. I do believe at the base of it, it's a place of love. It's a place of resilience. It's a place of, okay, this is what this literature says now, but how can we move forward and help? What can we do to make sure that this kid has a fighting chance? And the journey began.
And what was that? What did you decide that journey would be? Because I remember when Ken first told me this story, we were at dinner actually at a vascular conference. And I mean, to hear him talk about going to another conference and creating his own sign and trying to track down someone that would be interested in helping to find a cure. That just blew my mind. So take us on that journey from, hey, we need to do something, to actually taking those steps and doing something.
Go ahead, Kenny.
So I think, step one was trying to find out, if there was anyone, a physician, a pediatrician, a researcher that was working with kids. And there was an expert in New York that had been following kids with Riley-Day, familial dysautonomia, for some time, a pediatrician. And so step one was getting Andrew to New York to see if we could learn as much as we could from what is already known, from people that have been working with other kids that have the same condition. And that was very, very helpful just to know that you're part of a larger community. As I said, there were only 560 kids in the world that were diagnosed. So just being able to find one other, other families, other professionals was very, very helpful. Unfortunately, while a lot more was known about the clinical course of familial dysautonomia, there wasn't much progress being made in terms of the underlying cause and in terms of what we could do about it, if anything, to change the trajectory. And that's where, because of my background, my experience, just calling every single professional I knew within pediatrics, every specialty, every person I could think of that we could bring to bear, we created a bit of a think tank amongst professionals, geneticists, pediatricians, surgical specialists, everyone that I could bring together to say, there's a lot we don't know about what's happening here, but how would we go about finding out? And that's what prompted me, Kym, to start putting out notices at pediatric conferences that we were looking for medical genetic researchers. We were looking for people that are willing to work with a dedicated family to try to crack the code here and try to find a way to help Andrew. And through that search, we landed with the head of the Department of Biology at Fordham University, Dr. Berish Rubin, who had a personal connection, who also had a child with familial dysautonomia. And when we found each other, that's really where the next stage of the journey began, because Dr. Rubin was doing groundbreaking work in a completely different area of medical research. But when he found us and found a dedicated family willing to commit everything to starting to unravel the mystery around this disease, he dropped all of his research and said, if you can help raise the money, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to finding an answer for you guys. And that's really the journey that we've been on for the last 17 or so years, having established the Laboratory for Familial Dysautonomia Research at Fordham University.
We have...
The journey actually begins to finding the cure for familial dysautonomia, and we're going to find out how it unfolds next, right here on the Heart of Innovation, so stay with us.
Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation. For more on today's topic, go to theheartofinnovation.org. That's theheartofinnovation.org. Once again, here's Emmy Award-winning journalist Kym McNicholas and interventional cardiologist Dr. John Phillips.
Welcome back, everybody. We have a lot to cover and very little time left, so I want to get right back into where we were before we went to break. So you guys kind of got in touch with Dr. Rubin, right, from Fordham, and now you're in the process of trying to get genetic testing and also starting a foundation to raise money for the testing and then help ultimately maybe lead to a cure or a way to help these children, right?
Yes, so I think that's it. And Anne and I, we always tell the story about we started the foundation kind of rubbing our two little nickels together. We had, no place to start but our own resources. We literally just started this with about $5,000 of our own money and just started to work with Dr. Rubin on what do we need? What do we need to raise in order to start to sort of unravel the mystery? And so we created a foundation the way you do any organization. We talked with our friends. We talked with other family members of kids with familial dysautonomia. We started building a human network and people that were purely dedicated to trying to find answers. And over the years, Anne's really been running the foundation beautifully. And we grew from those initial days of a couple $1,000s to, raising consistently now between $250,000 and $300,000 a year to keep the doors of this lab open. I think since the time we started the foundation, we've now raised close to $4 million to fund the research into this illness. And Dr. Rubin has been able to hire and maintain a staff of professional researchers to dedicate 100% of their time to this. And I'll let Anne talk about the results. But over the last really 10 to 15 years, there have been over a dozen significant breakthroughs from the finding of the gene itself to understanding the underpinnings of what causes the illness, to starting to repair that damage, and putting all of the kids, particularly those that were born in the last 5 to 7 years, on a completely different path. So, Anne, do you want to talk about the major breakthroughs?
Sure. I think, Kym, like you were saying, sort of like these major points along the way, like once you finally get the diagnosis, then this whole world opens up. And once you finally identify the gene, that's like another pivotal point where, okay, the whole world opens up. What does the gene, what's this missing piece, and how do we plug that hole? I remember the very first treatment breakthrough was something called tocotrienol, which is a form of vitamin E. And Andrew was in the hospital. He was 10 at the time. He had been in the hospital for 6 months. He was in something called an autonomic crisis, which he would have wave after wave of these crises, high blood pressure, high heart rate, like in the 180s, blood pressure sometimes 200 over 100, intense retching. And really the only thing that would help calm that down is massive doses of Valium. So we were in the hospital. It was probably in the 5th month. We were staying at the Ronald McDonald House. Wow. And the doctors basically shrugged their shoulders and said, we don't know how to get him out of these constant crises. They just keep coming wave after wave, one day, 1, 2, 3 times a day.
Can I interrupt real quick? Is he like aware of this? Like neurologically, Andrew's normal, I guess? Is that the right word? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He's of normal cognitive development. He's of normal, you could talk to him and sit here and talk to him and you think nothing.
Okay.
He looks a little skinny, but you'd think, okay, yeah. So I remember I had left the hospital for like 5 minutes just to breathe. And Dr. Rubin called and said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to start giving Andrew tocotrienol. I'm like, what is tocotrienol? What are you talking about? What is this thing? And he said, it's very important. It's going to help elevate the protein that he's missing. And you got to try it. Well, how are we going to get it into him? Now, it did happen that Andrew had a G2. And so we figured out a way to take this little tiny gel to extract it with a fine needle, to put it into olive oil, to take a syringe to get data.
Did he send this to you guys, or did you just run to Walgreens and pick this up, or what?
He sent it to us.
Oh, he sent it to you. Okay.
He sent it because it was an actual compound that he had tested.
Okay.
That he knew had the right amount of the tocotrienol in it. So we did it. And Kenny and I, both being analytical people, we kept a log. And we rated the number of crises that Andrew had each day. and we also rated the intensity of those crises. And so for 2 weeks, we consistently gave him tocotrienol through his G tube, and we graphed out how many crises he was having and the intensity of these crises. And over the course of 2 weeks, the number of crises went down, the intensity went down, and at the end of the 2 weeks, sorry, this gets emotional, he sat up in his bed and he said, "Hey, I'm hungry." Oh, okay.
Wow.
So, if there's ever a time where you kind of have witnessed a miracle, like that, we were just looking at this, and of course, healthcare being what it was, said, "Okay, well, he's fine. He can leave now." We're like, no, let's give him a couple more days, please. Let's make sure this is really sticking. I did ask one of the doctors. I said, "Do you think that the tocotrienol is what turned Andrew around?" And he said, absent any other changes, because there were no other changes, one can only conclude that it was the tocotrienols. 3 days later, Andrew was discharged, and he came home. He ran around our house. He touched all the walls like, "I'm home, I'm home, I'm home." And he said to us that night, "I think I'd like to go out for sushi." Oh, okay. So my husband and I and our son Andrew and our daughter, who's 2 years younger than Andrew, all sat around a sushi boat restaurant as the sushis were going, all the different sushi were passing us. And Kenny and I are looking at each other as if we entered a new dimension. What just happened here? We were just in the hospital. We spent a half a year in the hospital. And now we're eating sushi together as a family.
Wow.
Is this the first time, the first time you probably felt hopeful in a long time, I imagine?
Yes. And it also was very empowering to know that there was something on the shelf in a store that could help turn Andrew around. There was something immediate. It was safe. It was accessible, and those elements, this idea that it is urgent that we help save these kids' lives, we do so quickly, we do so safely, we do so accessibly. Those values were in line with the researcher. So we were on the same page there.
And so that solution was a solution to manage once they were already in crises? What was the next step in terms of prevention of these crisis situations that could lead to a longer, better quality of life?
So the tocotrienols were not just for crises. It actually was addressing the increase of ICAP, which helped, that was the missing protein, which helped to stabilize Andrew's system. And instead of undulating up and down and up and down, it gave him smaller and smaller bumps along the way. So it was fixing the underlying cause of the condition. And the breakthroughs that have come since that point have all been aimed at doing that.
At what point did you, because Ken, during the break, you had mentioned creating this web of people and just connecting folks and trying to work towards a common cause. At what point did you realize, hey, wait a second, this is kind of bigger than me and us and Andrew, and we're really going to potentially make some changes and impact other people's lives?
Well, I think a couple things really helped us to figure this out. I mean, even what led us to the tocotrienol and what led Dr. Rubin to the tocotrienol is the families starting to find each other, connect with each other, and start to compare notes. And one of the things that we found when we started to really talk with one another is there always seemed to be certain foods or certain types of foods that made all of the kids feel really, really bad, and certain foods that seemed to be safe. And it was starting to gather log data on the dietary habits of the kids that we found. We always felt like autonomic crisis was triggered by the neurologic dysfunction.
Right.
We later found that a very substantial amount of autonomic crisis was being triggered just by what the kids were eating. That the kids were extremely sensitive to tyramine. Any foods that are aged or fermented or smoked, would almost immediately cause the kids to go into crisis, 4 to 6 hours later. So once the kids and all of the families started to put this data together, we started to learn if we avoided certain foods, the kids were on a much healthier track. And once we added some of the supplementation that we then learned was missing from the genetic research, we were able to give the kids cells the building blocks that they needed to actually produce healthy ICAP protein, which is what was missing in terms of the single gene, single protein disorder that they have.
And coming up right on the Heart of Innovation, next, we're going to hear next steps for continuing to find breakthroughs in this very rare genetic disorder. So stay with us.
Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation. For more on today's topic, go to theheartofinnovation.org. That's theheartofinnovation.org. Once again, here's Emmy Award-winning journalist Kym McNicholas and interventional cardiologist Dr. John Phillips.
Welcome back, everybody. So before we went to break, we've kind of narrowed it down, or Dr. Rubin narrowed it down to tocotrienol, right? And so ultimately you guys, or he figured out that this type of vitamin E is very prevalent in organic brown rice, which is what is in sushi rice sometimes, right?
Yes. I think as we were saying, part of developing the family network, and we all started comparing notes about what the kids were eating. A lot of the kids, seemed to have a strong preference at a young age for sushi, which was unusual in and of itself. And as we were logging what the kids seemed to do better with in terms of their diet, that sort of link of a lot of the kids doing well, eating organic brown rice or eating brown rice products or eating sushi, is what led Dr. Rubin to start to look at the interaction of diet with symptoms. And that's what sort of led him to the discovery of tocotrienol and a series of other supplements since then, which are just strengthening the ability of the kids to produce the protein that they're missing.
Does this ultimately lead to normalization of their autonomic system, or it just changes the baseline function of it?
Yeah, stabilization, I would say, is probably more accurate. So as Anne was describing, you have these wide swings, and now they're like little bumps along the road. And so the kids are much, much, much healthier, much more stable, not going into crisis, not having these wild swings, and able to live a much more normal life. Andrew had 36 hospitalizations in the first 10 years of his life. Since these breakthroughs, for Ph.D. alone, he's had 1 to 2.
Wow.
And how old is he now?
He's 31 years old.
And they said the life expectancy was what?
10.
Wow. Tripled.
That's amazing. So what's next in terms of research and Ph.D. now?
I think, the goal here is we've moved the bar from fatal to life-threatening to manageable. of course, ultimately, we'd like a cure. We're somewhere between life-threatening and manageable, leaning more toward manageable, which is a huge step from fatal. So the goal, of course, is to continue to find these new treatments, to continue to stabilize the autonomic system so that these kids can not undulate so much, and to really have them lead meaningful, productive lives.
And I have to ask, who's the funniest Slaw?
Andrew.
I love that. Thank you so much, Ken and Anne, for joining us and sharing your story. It's incredibly powerful, and I hope it inspires so many more that they do have a choice and that they can make a difference in not only their family's life, their own life, but that of others. And if you want to learn more about the FD Now organization, go to fdnow.org.
You've been listening to The Heart of Innovation with Emmy Award-winning journalist Kym McNicholas and interventional cardiologist Dr. John Phillips. Our mission is to help patients live a better quality of life through comprehensive education, real-time support, and high-touch advocacy in partnership with thewaytomyheart.org and Take a Stand Against Amputation. Our purpose is to reduce the 1.5 million heart attacks and strokes and nearly 200,000 amputations annually. For more information regarding topics you've heard discussed on today's program, go to theheartofinnovation.org. That's theheartofinnovation.org. The Heart of Innovation is for educational and informational purposes only, and advice and views shared are not a substitute for medical advice from your own supervising physician. Do not act on any information provided in this show without the explicit consent from your own healthcare team. If you think you are having a medical emergency, call your local emergency number or go to the nearest hospital or emergency room.